studio, former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. Good morning.
Neil, thank you for having me on the program.
You do seem to get beaten up whenever you put your head up, don't you?
Well, if you start to complain about that in politics, you'd never walk out the door of a morning, mate. So my attitude to all that is just brush yourself off, pick yourself up, and off you go and do your day's work.
Wouldn't you continue with your public appearances?
Yeah, I will, but as I make judgments as to where they are helpful. As you said in your intro, we agreed to have a chat every month or so. And I have one or two other regular things I do in the media. But most of my time I spend out there assisting Labor candidates and Labor members. I was doing that last Monday. I'm doing it again for Laura Smythe today, who's our fantastic member for Latrobe.
Well, that's an interesting point, though. You did that in Adelaide, but the media wasn't welcome in Adelaide. Why was that?
Well, I think there was a bit of a mix-up over timetabling. I'd agreed with one of our Adelaide members, good fella, Tony Zappia, to go and do an interfaith forum. We agreed on that last, I think, November. And then it turned out, and I don't think there's any great conspiracy in this, that the cabinet, or the regional cabinet, or the community cabinet agreed to be in Adelaide on the same day, and they made that decision at the end of January. So the smarter thing to do was to make sure there was no conflict, so there'd be no media sideshow.
Okay, so you won't be winding back your public appearances?
No, I'll just continue doing what I do in response to the interests of local members. I've got about 20 or 30 invitations from members and candidates around the country. And I do this very much at a local level, as I'll be doing it with Laura today. And the reason I'm doing it, we have very many good members of the team. I believe the government has a very good record to sell. And I also believe that we have good plans for the future. Unlike the document sitting in front of me, Neil, called Costed and Fully Budgeted, Mr Abbott's so-called Real Solutions Plan for the future.
Perhaps we'll get that in a moment. You know I'm going to have to ask you about the leadership. Would you ever allow yourself to be drafted?
Neil, I've said I won't challenge. I mean that. On the so-called draft that you've just referred to, I support the Prime Minister going through to the next election. All other members of the caucus support the Prime Minister going through to the next election. The issue of a draft doesn't arise.
If it did, what would you do?
The issue of a draft just doesn't arise. That's my answer.
But that's not an answer.
Of course it is. You know that.
No, it's not. I mean, you know the speculation. You wouldn't challenge. You've said you wouldn't challenge, quite rightly. But if somebody came and tapped you on the shoulder and said, look, we want to draft you, you'd be interested.
Neil, I'm not challenging. And as I've said to you and to others a dozen times, I support the Prime Minister. The rest of the parliamentary party supports the Prime Minister. Therefore, the issue of a draft doesn't arise.
Kevin Smith has said to
he'd be offended by that.
Stephen Smith, the Defence Minister, said today that if there was any challenge to the Prime Minister, you would be a human shield protecting her. Would you?
Well, according to last night's news, someone else accused me of being a terrorist, so you get a bit confused by these things. The bottom line is this. I will be doing my bit in the general media where appropriate, but more importantly around the country, supporting local members and local candidates in selling the message of the government's achievements. And these are good ones: keeping the economy strong through the financial crisis, 860,000 new jobs, low interest rates, unemployment half that of the rest of Europe, and this is a good record.
Yeah, but you're in trouble, aren't you? The government's in trouble, big trouble.
Well, these are difficult times, but you've been around for a long time, Neil.
Yeah, I've never seen a government recover from this level.
Well, I recall people like Mr Howard being in a serious hole in his first term.
30% primary vote.
You look back in the period of his first term, he was in all sorts of difficulty. Remember, Hawke almost lost the 1984 election, having been elected in 1983. I think there is often a lack of historical context. Look, of course, the challenges are real. I understand that. Anyone who's a political realist understands that. But the bottom line is our challenge is to explain our record against, for example, the Liberal solution for the global financial crisis, which was, in effect, wait for the normal business cycle to recover and don't stimulate the economy. The result would have been 600,000 more people unemployed. Next time you're at the MCG, imagine it filled 7 times over. That's how many more people would be out of a job if we had the unemployment rates that Europe has today.
You're about the most popular politician in the country. Why?
I think that's not necessarily the case, actually. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other people out there.
Well, what was your rating in this latest poll? 60% approval, wasn't it? And the Prime Minister was about 30%.
But what I'm saying is in local communities across the country, local MPs of whichever hue may have huge levels of support. In terms of levels of popular support, popularity is one thing. Being in a position to translate policies into action, I've had my opportunity to do that as Prime Minister. I believe...
Sure, you wouldn't like it again.
I acquitted myself reasonably well. Remember, the big test of a government is when a crisis hits you amidships, which was the global financial crisis, and you know as well as I do, it was the biggest global downturn since the Great Depression. We could have turned ourselves into the Scullin government of 1929 and simply gone out the door backwards. We could have taken the advice of the Liberals and sat on our hands and done nothing and wait for the business cycle to repair itself, or take bold decisions to guarantee people's bank deposits, to guarantee interbank lending, to stimulate the economy. And as a result, we came through as the only major advanced economy without going into recession and with half the unemployment rate of the rest of the world, the rest of the developed world. This is a good record, and it's one, had we listened to Mr Abbott's prescriptions, would not have occurred.
But that's a good record of the previous government, not this one.
Well, the government was made up of a team. At that stage, the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, was the Deputy Prime Minister. She was part of the team. The Treasurer, Wayne Swan, was part of that team. All I'm saying is this is part and parcel of who we are.
So what's gone wrong? Why is it Labor so much on the nose?
Well, there are difficulties of communicating a message, and to be fair to the Prime Minister, her circumstances in 2010 were different to those of 2007 because she became Prime Minister of a minority government. And as we've seen, if your fickle partners in such a government, namely the Green Party...
I'd like to get to them, yes.
Well, the Green Party, they like to call themselves the Greens, as if it's a social movement. The Green Party, it's a political party which organises itself for political purposes. The same principled environmental party who voted twice against and supported the Liberals in refusing to pass an emissions trading scheme in the period that I was Prime Minister. I think the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, has had more than a few challenges on our hand in dealing with the minority parties.
But there is a communication problem, you think?
Look, the core of the government's challenge is not its record or its plans for the future. The core of the government's challenge has been dealing with a very fractious Parliament. I believe the message, as communicated by multiple ministers of the government, is pretty clear. We have a plan for the future. I think you interviewed Mr Abbott yesterday, the day before.
But why so much on the nose? If you've got good plans, good ideas, good communication, why are you standing at 30%?
Well, the core challenge in political life is to know what you stand for and why, to argue your plan for the future. Secondly, to say how you're going to cost that plan. And thirdly, if you're in government, to implement it. Now, that's what we will stand by, as well as our plans for the future.
That's not happening at the moment, is it?
Yeah.
What does Labor stand for?
Well, Labor stands for two fundamental values, and that is the freedom of the individual plus a fair go for all Australians. And a fair go was denied them when Mr Abbott backed John Howard's prescription for work choices. You asked him this question in your interview the other day. Will you ever do work choices again, Tony? To which he said, no, I've signed a pledge in front of you. That's the same Tony Abbott, Neil, who then, some years ago, said on Medicare prior to 2004 election, you have my rock-solid, ironclad guarantee there'd be no change. But hang on. He's also said that work choices was the biggest policy achievement of the Howard government.